The hall was old, the kind of place where the walls remembered more music than the people sitting inside it. Paint peeled near the corners, chairs creaked when anyone shifted, and the lights buzzed softly above. It was not a grand venue. It was not meant to impress anyone. Still, for her, it felt heavy. Every step she took across the wooden floor echoed louder than it should have. She stood near the entrance for a moment, holding her hands together, breathing slowly. She had been invited late, almost as an afterthought. Someone had mentioned there might be time for one more performance if she wanted it. No promises, no guarantees, just a chance. She was used to chances that felt uncertain. Music had always been part of her life, but never in an easy way. She grew up listening from doorways, from behind half-open windows, from places where she wasn't meant to be seen. Lessons were expensive. Good instruments were rare. Praise came even less. When she played, people often nodded politely, then looked past her as if something better might arrive soon. Tonight felt no different. At the front of the hall sat the piano, or what was left of it. The wood was scratched and dull. Several keys were yellowed with age. One corner had a crack that looked like it had been there for years. The bench wobbled slightly when touched. Anyone who knew pianos could see the problem right away. This instrument had been given up on. She noticed the looks in the room as soon as she saw the piano. Some people frowned, not at the piano, but at her. A few whispered to each other. One person shook their head slowly, as if already predicting how this would end. She felt her stomach tighten. Someone from the side motioned for her to go ahead. No introduction, no warm words, just a hand gesture and a tired smile. The message was clear: do what you can, quickly. She walked toward the piano, her shoes tapping lightly against the floor. With each step, memories followed her. A teacher once telling her she lacked polish. An organizer who said she was fine, but not memorable. A room that clapped politely and forgot her by the next act. She reached the bench and paused. Up close, the piano looked worse. A few keys sat lower than the rest. Others didn't return properly after being pressed. She gently tested one key. The sound came out weak, almost embarrassed. Another key didn't make a sound at all. A quiet laugh drifted from somewhere in the back. She straightened her back and rested her hands on her lap. For a brief moment, she considered standing up and walking away. No one would stop her. Some might even feel relieved. She imagined the relief herself, the release from pressure, the safety of leaving before failing. But something deeper stirred inside her. She had played in worse conditions before. Cold rooms, broken stools, pianos missing notes. She learned early that waiting for perfect conditions meant waiting forever. Music, for her, was never about perfection. It was about honesty. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. The hall grew quiet, not with anticipation, but with curiosity mixed with doubt. People leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed. Some looked at their phones, already distracted. They were not expecting much. She pressed the first key slowly. The sound was thin but clear enough. She tried another, adjusting her touch. Then another. She was not playing yet. She was listening, learning the piano's limits, its mood, its weaknesses. Each sound told her something. Each broken note asked her to find another path. Her breathing slowed. She thought about why she came here in the first place. Not for applause. Not for approval. She came because music was the one place where she felt true. Where the noise of judgment faded, even if only for a moment. She began again, this time with intention. The melody started softly, almost cautiously. She avoided the keys that resisted her. She leaned into the ones that still responded. The tune was simple, nothing dramatic. Just a gentle flow, like a conversation whispered instead of spoken aloud. A few heads lifted. She continued, shaping the music around the piano's flaws instead of fighting them. Where a key failed, she left a pause. Where the sound rang uneven, she softened her touch. The silence between notes became part of the story. Someone near the front sat up straighter. Her shoulders relaxed as she played. The fear that had followed her inside the hall began to loosen its grip. This was familiar territory now. Just her and the sound, imperfect but alive. The piano responded in its own way. It was not beautiful in a traditional sense, but it was honest. The cracks in the sound added texture, like an old voice telling a story it had lived. The room felt different. The whispers stopped. The restless shifting eased. Phones were lowered. People were listening now, not because they expected greatness, but because something real was happening. She felt it too. Her fingers moved with more confidence. She allowed the melody to grow slightly, still careful, still respectful of the instrument's limits. She was not trying to impress. She was trying to connect. For the first time that evening, she forgot about the eyes watching her. She remembered late nights practicing alone, playing quietly so no one would complain. She remembered choosing music over rest, over comfort, over certainty. Those memories flowed into the notes, giving them weight. The piano creaked softly beneath her hands, but it did not give up. Neither did she. As the melody settled into a steady rhythm, something shifted inside the hall. It was subtle but undeniable. The room felt closer, as if the distance between people had narrowed. Even those who doubted her now watched with focused attention. She finished the phrase gently and let the sound fade. There was no applause yet, no reaction at all, only silence. Not the awkward kind, the listening kind. She stayed still, hands resting lightly on the keys, knowing this was only the beginning. The piano had spoken its first words, and she had many more to say. The silence stayed longer than she expected. It wrapped around the room and pressed gently against her ears. She could feel people holding their breath, unsure of what they were listening to, unsure of how to react. She did not rush to break it. She had learned that silence, when respected, could speak just as loudly as sound. Her fingers hovered above the keys. The piano felt warm now, as if it had woken from a long sleep. She pressed another note, then another, letting them fall carefully into place. The melody this time carried a bit more weight. Not louder, not faster, just deeper. Someone in the middle row leaned forward. She noticed it from the corner of her eye but stayed focused. She knew how easily distraction could break the fragile connection she was building. She had lost it before by caring too much about reactions. Tonight, she refused to let that happen. As she played, her thoughts drifted to the many times she had been tested without being told it was a test. Moments where people watched not to enjoy but to judge. They smiled before she began, already certain of the outcome. She recognized the same feeling in the room now. The difference was that she no longer feared it. The piano answered her unevenly. One note rang longer than expected. Another cut off too soon. Instead of correcting it, she allowed it. She slowed her pace, giving space for each sound to settle. The music felt less like a performance and more like a shared moment. A soft cough echoed from the back. Normally, that would have broken her focus. Tonight, it blended into the atmosphere, like a reminder that this was real life, not a perfect stage. Her hands moved gently, never forcing the keys. She adjusted without thinking, letting instinct guide her. Years of quiet practice had taught her how to adapt. When something didn't work, she didn't panic. She found another way. The faces in the room began to change. At first, it was subtle. A raised eyebrow, a softened expression, a crossed arm slowly dropping to a lap. The doubt that had once filled the air began to thin, replaced by curiosity. She felt a small tightness in her chest, not from fear, but from emotion. Playing like this always brought memories she tried to keep buried. Moments of loneliness. Nights when she wondered if anyone would ever truly listen. She kept playing. The melody grew slightly stronger now, still gentle but more confident. It carried the feeling of someone who had been ignored but never silenced. Someone who learned to speak softly because shouting never worked. A person near the aisle wiped their eyes quickly, as if surprised by their own reaction. She did not see that, but she felt the shift. The room was no longer waiting for her to fail. It was following her. Her shoulders loosened further. She leaned into the piano, not physically, but emotionally. She trusted it now, broken keys and all. It was no longer an obstacle. It was a partner. A memory surfaced of a time when she was younger, playing on an instrument missing several notes. She had cried that day, feeling cheated. An older voice had told her something she never forgot. If you can play on this, you can play anywhere. Those words guided her hands now. She introduced a new phrase into the melody, careful and deliberate. It wasn't complicated. It didn't need to be. Simplicity allowed feeling to breathe. Each note felt like a step forward, slow but steady. The hall felt smaller, not because people were closing in, but because attention had narrowed. Nothing else mattered in that moment. Not the old walls. Not the broken bench. Not the quiet doubts still lingering in some corners. Only the sound. The piano surprised her once more when a key she had avoided suddenly responded. The note rang out, clear and full. It startled her, but she welcomed it, weaving it gently into the melody as if it had always belonged there. A quiet murmur spread through the audience. She did not smile. She stayed focused, knowing how easily pride could interrupt honesty. She had seen performers lose their way chasing reaction instead of truth. She refused to let that be her story. Her playing now carried a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Not rushed, not hesitant, alive. The broken piano no longer sounded broken. It sounded human. A chair creaked as someone shifted closer to the edge of their seat. She felt a calm she had rarely known during performances. There was no voice in her head telling her to be better, louder, faster. There was only presence. Each note felt like a conversation between her past and her present. The melody softened again, pulling inward. She wanted the listeners to lean in, not be pushed back. She wanted them to feel, not be impressed. She closed her eyes briefly, trusting her hands to remember the path. The darkness behind her eyelids felt safe. In that space, she was not being judged. She was simply playing. When she opened her eyes, the room felt different. People were still. Not frozen, but attentive in a way that felt rare. Even those who had seemed bored earlier now watched with quiet respect. She played through another phrase and let it trail off gently. Again, she allowed silence. This time it felt heavier, fuller. No one laughed. No one whispered. The piano hummed softly as the last vibration faded. She took a slow breath, knowing she was reaching something important. This was not the end yet. This was the point where doubt and belief crossed paths. She rested her fingers lightly on the keys, preparing to continue, unaware of how deeply she had already changed the room, and perhaps herself. The melody had settled into a rhythm that was both fragile and strong. Each note seemed to hang in the air, catching attention not by force, but by invitation. She let her fingers drift lightly, choosing the timing of each press as carefully as a painter selects brush strokes. The piano, once lifeless and unyielding, now responded in small bursts of sound that told a story older than the room itself. She felt a strange connection to it. This piano had been abandoned, neglected, and dismissed just like she had felt so many times in her life. The broken keys, the dull notes, even the stubborn pedals. They all whispered of the years they had endured without anyone to care. And yet, here they were, coming to life under her hands. A soft gasp came from the front row, almost involuntary. Someone was leaning forward, eyes wide, as if they had only just realized what was happening. It wasn't just a performance anymore. It was something deeper, something that reached beyond talent or training. Her mind drifted briefly to her own past. She remembered a night when she had been small, hiding in a corner of a room where the grown-ups played music. She had touched a piano then, not allowed to play fully, only to peek and press a key or two. The sound had made her heart leap in ways she couldn't explain. A tiny spark that grew over the years. That spark had never gone out, even when life seemed determined to snuff it. She pressed a key that had been silent moments before. It answered finally, not with a perfect tone, but with a raw, honest sound. She embraced it, letting the imperfection become part of the rhythm. A melody was forming, not in spite of the flaws, but because of them. The pauses, the unexpected sounds, the uneven notes. They added texture and meaning that no flawless instrument could ever give. People in the room were no longer whispering or fidgeting. They were leaning in, silently acknowledging the courage it took to play something so uncertain with such commitment. Their skepticism had melted into curiosity, and curiosity had softened into admiration. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her memories guide her hands. She thought about the people who had told her she wasn't good enough, the faces that had turned away, the dismissive comments she had endured. She did not play to prove them wrong. She played because her music was hers to give, and tonight the broken piano was listening. The melody grew, winding and gentle, a conversation between her fingers and the piano's response. She adjusted constantly, sensing when a note was too sharp, too short, or too soft. She learned the instrument as she went, guiding it rather than forcing it. There was a flow now, a dialogue, and with each note, the room seemed to draw closer. A mother with a young child clutched the child's hand, the child's eyes wide with wonder. A man sitting near the back let out a barely audible sigh, as if finally recognizing the effort, the persistence, the vulnerability in front of him. She could not see them clearly, but she felt their presence in the air around her. The piano groaned softly as she shifted her weight, a sound that could have been a flaw in another setting. She treated it like a voice in a choir, letting it speak where it would. The room seemed to lean into the music, accepting it in all its imperfection. For the first time, she felt entirely at home. Not because the room or the people were perfect, but because she and the piano were. She had stopped trying to control every note, every reaction. She simply let the story emerge through her fingers, letting each error, each hesitation, each tiny triumph contribute to the whole. A subtle smile appeared on her lips, but she did not stop. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, a collective awareness that something unusual was unfolding. Not everyone would understand it, but everyone could feel it. There was honesty here, a transparency in sound that spoke to something deeper than skill or training. She remembered being told once that a broken instrument would always limit a musician, that it could never produce true music. She had believed it at the time, feeling the weight of disappointment pressing down on her shoulders. Now she realized how wrong that idea had been. Music was not about perfection. It was about connection, feeling, expression, and the courage to speak even when the voice trembles. Her fingers moved faster now, not recklessly, but with a steady, deliberate confidence. She allowed a small flourish, letting the broken notes ring and fade, weaving them into the melody so that they became integral, not distracting. Every imperfection added character, a story within the story. She looked up briefly, catching glimpses of the audience. Their faces were changing. Some were smiling softly, others had eyes glistening with emotion. She felt no pride, only a quiet satisfaction that the music was reaching them. This was never about proving anything to them. It was about letting them witness something that came from the heart, unfiltered and honest. The piano responded in ways that surprised her. Small notes she had not expected, tiny echoes that seemed to answer her own thoughts. It was as if the instrument itself was awakening, remembering that it had a voice, and it was her hands that coaxed it back to life. A laugh broke from somewhere in the back, not mocking this time, but soft and filled with disbelief. The person could not believe the music they were hearing. Neither could she, in a way. She had not planned for it to feel like this, had not imagined that a neglected instrument could sing so clearly under her fingers. She slowed her pace, letting the final notes of the phrase linger longer than usual. The sound stretched across the hall, filling corners and reaching into the silence that had waited patiently. She paused, hands hovering above the keys, and let the moment breathe. The audience was quiet, still, as if holding their collective breath. Not the polite silence of people unsure what to do, but a genuine, shared quiet that honored the music and the effort it took to make it. She thought of all the moments that had led her here, all the doors that had closed, all the hands that had turned her away, all the times she had been told no. She realized now that each no had prepared her for this very moment, teaching patience, resilience, and faith in her own persistence. Her fingers found the keys again, soft at first, then gradually more assured. The piano seemed to join in the conversation, offering notes that were unexpected yet fitting. She adapted, moved, and responded, letting the imperfections guide the flow rather than hinder it. The hall seemed smaller now, not because of the walls, but because of the intimacy that had formed. People leaned forward without realizing it, not to catch a detail, but to feel closer to something genuine. The broken piano had become a bridge between her and everyone present. A small child clapped quietly, almost shyly, but the sound echoed in the room and was quickly followed by another small clap. Gradually, the audience allowed themselves to acknowledge what they were witnessing, not with judgment, but with appreciation. She smiled lightly, keeping her focus on the keys. She did not need the applause yet. The story was still unfolding, and she wanted it to grow naturally. Each note, each pause, each interaction with the piano contributed to a larger whole, and rushing would have spoiled it. She remembered the advice of a mentor long ago. Music is not measured by how flawlessly you play, but by how honestly you let the world hear your voice. She had lived that lesson quietly for years, and tonight it manifested fully through her fingertips. The piano hummed beneath her hands, imperfect yet alive. The melody twisted and turned, exploring quiet corners and unexpected highs. Each key that had once refused to respond now contributed to a texture that was richer, more human, and undeniably moving. She felt herself floating in the music, aware of the room but not bound by it. Time seemed to stretch, the minutes slipping into each other as the melody grew and shifted, living beyond her control. And as she played, she realized something important. The piano had never been broken. It had only been waiting for someone to listen, to understand, and to care enough to coax its voice into the light. And she had done just that. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every note she played carried more than sound. It carried history, struggle, and quiet triumph. The broken piano had transformed, its imperfections no longer flaws but voices adding depth and texture. She moved her fingers carefully, not forcing anything, letting the music find its own path. Each phrase rose and fell with intention, speaking in a language beyond words. People in the audience leaned forward instinctively, drawn by the honesty of the performance. There were no exaggerations, no unnecessary flourishes. Just a woman and an instrument, both carrying years of neglect and doubt, now speaking together in a harmony that was surprisingly beautiful. Some faces were softened by emotion. Some were taut with disbelief. They had come expecting mediocrity or awkwardness, but instead, they were witnessing something alive. Her hands glided over the keys with confidence, sensing the piano's responses as if it were a living creature. She had learned its quirks, its stubborn notes, its hesitant sounds. Every hesitation became an accent, every uneven key a note of expression. She was no longer controlling the piano. She was partnering with it, and it responded with a richness that surprised even her. She remembered a time years ago, standing outside a music room, listening to someone play a flawless piece. She had felt envious, small, inadequate. Her hands had trembled at the thought of trying to reach that level. But those years of longing had taught her patience. Tonight, she realized perfection was not the point. Emotion was. She let her hands linger on certain keys, creating soft pauses that carried more weight than a dozen fast notes could. The audience noticed. A few whispered to themselves, caught in the gentle sway of the melody. It was not loud or fast, but it was impossible to ignore. She could feel the energy in the room shifting. Doubt was being replaced by curiosity, curiosity by awe. Somewhere in the back, a woman held her hands together, eyes glistening, captivated. A man near the aisle tapped his foot softly, not out of rhythm but unconsciously responding to the life pulsing from the piano. The child in the audience watched wide-eyed, sensing the magic without understanding it fully. Everyone was connected to the same fragile thread of music, each heart beating slightly faster, listening slightly closer. The melody changed subtly, taking on a deeper, more personal tone. She thought about the times she had been told no, the doors closed in her face, the opportunities that never came. She did not let bitterness creep in. Instead, She allowed the feelings of persistence, resilience, and quiet determination to shape the music. Each note became a testament to the strength it took to keep going, to keep playing, to keep believing when no one else did. Her eyes closed for a moment, letting memory and intuition guide her hands. She remembered small victories, playing a piece perfectly in an empty room, coaxing a stubborn note to respond, making a melody from what seemed impossible. All those moments had led her here, to this exact hour, in this exact hall, with this exact piano. The audience did not know the story, but they felt it. The piano responded in kind, surprising her with a few notes that rang out more fully than she expected. She welcomed them, integrating them seamlessly into the growing melody. There was no room for control now, only collaboration. And together, they created something that transcended expectation. The atmosphere was palpable. The hall, old and creaking, seemed to shrink. People leaned in instinctively, not because of curiosity alone, but because something in them recognized honesty and courage. Some faces were wet with tears they didn't even realize had formed. Some lips moved slightly, whispering encouragement in silence. The room was no longer just a space. It was a witness. She increased the tempo just slightly, allowing the melody to rise and fall with subtle dynamism. She did not rush, but she did not linger too long either. Each phrase was deliberate, each pause purposeful. The broken piano was singing now, and the room listened, enraptured. She remembered moments when she had felt small in life. People had laughed at her dreams or dismissed her talent. Those moments, once heavy, were now transformed into fuel for her music. Every hesitation she had felt before, every fear of failing, every judgmental glance, all of it had shaped the sound she produced now. She smiled softly, knowing that pain and perseverance could produce something unexpectedly beautiful. Somewhere in the middle row, an older man shook his head in disbelief. He had expected a joke, a sad display, but what he witnessed was a revelation. The music did not belong to perfection. It belonged to the heart. The way she coaxed the piano, the way she adjusted to its flaws, the way she poured herself into each note. All of it spoke of authenticity and courage. The melody softened, drawing the listeners in closer. She allowed moments of near silence, where the broken keys barely spoke, to emphasize what came next. Each note, each pause, each subtle tremor was part of a narrative the audience could feel, but could not describe. Her music was a bridge, connecting past struggles, present effort, and the shared human experience in the room. She let her hands linger on the keys, gently lifting them to release the last vibrations of the phrase. The piano hummed softly in reply, as if acknowledging its own rebirth. She realized she was no longer playing for an audience. She was playing with them. Every person in that hall had become part of the story simply by being present, by opening themselves to the honesty of sound. A soft sigh spread through the room. Not everyone understood why they felt moved. They only knew that something profound had happened. The broken piano, once laughed at, once dismissed, had found its voice. And through it she had found hers. She slowed her tempo, letting the melody settle, allowing every note to linger. The room was completely silent now, not awkwardly, but in a way that felt reverent. People held their breath, absorbing the subtle power of what they were witnessing. It was no longer just a performance. It was a moment of transformation. Her hands hovered lightly above the keys, ready to continue, to explore the next phrase, but she paused. She let the room feel the weight of what had already been shared. The broken piano had sung, and for the first time, everyone in that hall heard it clearly. Her heart felt light. The fear and doubt that had accompanied her to the hall were gone, replaced by calm and quiet joy. She had done what she came to do, not for validation but for connection. The music had spoken for her, and the audience had listened with open hearts. She smiled softly, her eyes glancing briefly at the faces in the crowd. They were different now, changed, stirred, touched by something beyond performance, beyond skill. They had witnessed courage and honesty. They had witnessed resilience. And the piano, once discarded and ignored, had become a partner in that transformation. a voice rising from neglect into expression, singing through imperfection into beauty. The final notes floated into the air, lingering longer than anyone expected. She lifted her hands slowly from the piano, letting them hover above the keys for a heartbeat before resting them gently in her lap. The hall was quiet at first, a kind of stunned silence that felt thicker than any applause. Every person seemed to be holding their breath, caught between disbelief and awe. She could feel the shift in the room, the change in energy that had grown steadily since she began playing. The music had stopped, but its echo remained. People looked at each other, unsure of how to respond, yet the reaction was inevitable. Slowly, quietly, one person clapped. Then another. It started almost timidly, like breaking through a fragile shell. The sound grew, multiplied, until the applause filled the room. Not a polite, distracted clap, but a real, honest response. They had not expected this, and now they were celebrating it. She did not move immediately. She stayed seated, taking in the faces, noticing the tears, the smiles, the wide eyes of those who had been touched without fully understanding why. She allowed herself a small, private smile. She had done more than play music. She had transformed a broken instrument, a neglected moment, into something unforgettable. People began to approach her slowly, tentatively at first. Some offered quiet congratulations, others extended hands, and a few were speechless, unable to find words. There were no judgments now, no whispered doubts, only acknowledgement, recognition of the courage it took to sit down and play despite imperfection, despite fear, despite past disappointments. She remembered the piano, how it had seemed impossible at first. Each stubborn key, each muted note, had once felt like a wall she could never climb. Yet tonight, they had sung, carried by patience, care, and the willingness to listen. And in listening, she had learned something profound. Music was never about the instrument. It was about heart, persistence, and honesty. A few people lingered near the back, catching their breath. One older man who had seemed skeptical the entire night shook his head slowly, his expression softening. He whispered to someone beside him, words she did not hear, but the awe was clear in his eyes. She noticed a child who had clapped earlier, now standing on tiptoe, clinging to a parent's arm, eyes wide as if realizing the magic of what had happened. She had never felt so present, so grounded, so fully herself. Years of quiet practice, moments of solitude, nights spent coaxing melodies from reluctant fingers. All of it had led to this point. Not to impress, not to seek fame, but to share something true. To show that resilience, patience, and belief could create beauty, even when conditions seemed impossible. Someone approached with a small notebook, offering a hesitant question about lessons, about technique, about how she had done it. She smiled softly, realizing that explanation could never capture the essence. There was no formula, no secret shortcut. There was only listening, observing, and responding. There was only courage and honesty. A few minutes passed, and the room had shifted. The energy that had been tentative, cautious, even doubtful at the start was now warm, vibrant, and appreciative. The broken piano sat quietly, a witness to its own revival. Its keys, some still imperfect, seemed almost proud, contributing to the moment it had longed for. The room no longer judged it. It had earned respect, and in doing so, she had earned hers too. She rose from the bench finally, stretching lightly, feeling the weight of the experience and the release of tension that had accompanied it. People approached with smiles, words of encouragement, and gratitude. She walked slowly toward them, accepting their warmth without arrogance, knowing that the music itself had spoken louder than she ever could. Someone offered her another opportunity to play, this time in a better hall with a proper instrument. She nodded politely, but she felt a quiet truth settle in her chest. Tonight had not been about the next chance. It had been about this moment, this piano, this room, and the honesty that emerged when she dared to listen and respond rather than control or demand perfection. She realized she did not need the next opportunity to validate her talent. She had already proven to herself what mattered most. As she walked out of the hall, People lingered, talking softly, sharing impressions, replaying what they had heard in their minds. She felt light, unburdened, free. The piano would remain there, waiting for the next musician, but it had sung once more, and that memory would linger far beyond the walls of that old, worn hall. She stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her face, and for the first time in years, she felt a quiet contentment. The fear, the doubt, the years of being overlooked, they did not vanish completely, but they were tempered now by proof, by music, by the courage to try when conditions were far from ideal. She had learned that obstacles were not limits, only challenges to be understood and worked with. She had learned that true expression could flourish in the most unlikely circumstances. The city was quiet at this hour, the streets softly lit by lamps, the night holding a calm that mirrored her own sense of achievement. She walked slowly, savoring the calm after the storm, aware of the power that lived quietly within her, always ready to emerge when she chose to embrace it. She felt a gentle pride, not of arrogance, but of quiet, deep satisfaction. She had faced imperfection and fear, and turned it into art. She had made the unplayable sing. She paused for a moment at the corner of the street, looking up at the stars. They seemed to twinkle a little brighter, as if acknowledging what had happened in that small hall. She knew there would be other challenges, other imperfect pianos, other moments of doubt. But she also knew she had found the strength, the patience, and the understanding to transform them into something remarkable. Tonight had shown her that music, like courage, could flourish in unlikely places and against all odds. Her steps became lighter as she moved on, leaving the hall behind, but carrying the memory of it in her heart. She had given herself fully to the music, to the piano, and to the moment. She had discovered that beauty is not born of perfection, but of persistence, honesty, and the willingness to listen. And that discovery, she knew, would guide her every time she faced an instrument, a challenge, or life itself.